I'm really excited to be here. We're going to be talking about mastering word of mouth measurement, unlocking the viral vault. If you haven't already, change your name in Zoom, first name, last name, and company name, and that'll help for the QA portion. Our agenda for today. So we'll do a quick intro, and then we'll talk about why you should even care about this. Like, why are you even here? Why are you giving me your time? And then we'll get 25 minutes. The bulk of this will be on talking about 2 actionable methods for measuring word of mouth. And then we'll have 15 minutes for QA. Now, why you should care, who am I and why should you care? My name is Yousuf Bhaijee. I'm a full-time growth advisor since 2020. I advise 2 to 3 startups at a time on hard to solve growth problems. My background before that is I've been a long-time growth operator with startups and big companies. So I've been a growth leader at companies like Zynga, Eaze, Disney, ClassDojo, Brightwheel, where I've typically built out growth teams from scratch and worked on some really hard growth problems. Now, why should you listen to me about viral growth and word of mouth? It's always good to be a skeptic. So here's why I think you should listen to me. My viral growth background, I've worked on some of the most viral products in tech. So I'm going to give you a couple examples. ClassDojo, which is a classroom management software for teachers. It's used in 90% of K through 6 school districts in the US, and it grew 100% through word of mouth. This is going to be a part of a case study, which we'll get into later. I also was a growth leader at Zynga, and Zynga, it's a bunch of mobile and social games. Farmville is one of their most popular ones, and Farmville alone has been played by over 1 billion people. That means 1 in 8 people in the world. So others, Disney mobile games, 100 million free app installs across Disney mobile games when I was there. And then lastly is Eaze, which is for people in California, you'll know it. It's a cannabis delivery startup. It was in 2017, greater than 10% of California's legal market, and greater than 50% of acquisition was through word of mouth. Now, just to get this out of the way, this talk may not be applicable to everyone, and I just want to bring that up. Who it might not be applicable to. So if nobody loves your product, I'm sorry, but this talk is not going to be applicable. Not every product has to be 10x better, but product love does drive word of mouth. And if you are not there, be realistic, and it's not the time to work on this. Second is, if your product has poor retention, fix that first. Poor retention breaks word of mouth growth loops. Third, if your product doesn't have product market fit, this is not relevant now. It will be later. Bookmark this and come back to it. And then lastly, if your customers are mostly enterprise, this is going to be a little bit less applicable to you. Before we get in, I think there's one housekeeping item. There should be a poll that was put in. Eleanor is going to do that. Please answer it. The question is effectively, how familiar are you with the word of mouth coefficient, which is one of our 2 topics. The reason I'm asking this is if people are familiar about it, because we've written about it, we'll spend less time on it and more time on the new word of mouth measurement framework and technique. So word of mouth is a big topic. There's a lot in here, but we are only focusing on measurement today. I think there's 4 pillars for word of mouth growth loop foundations. Doing this talk because we might actually do a course on it, a Reforge course. And this is going to be a way to get some initial demand signal for that. But that means I'm going to try and focus mostly on word of mouth, just measurement of word of mouth. Now, why should you care about word of mouth measurement? 3 reasons. 1, acquisition is getting harder. That means channel saturation, competition, and worse economics. Already greater than 70% of ad budgets are spent on Meta, Google, and Amazon. And AI, as we speak, is decreasing search real estate. With that, word of mouth at the same time is extremely influential. According to Nielsen, 92% of consumers trust recommendations from friends and family over all forms of advertising. If you ask yourself this in your heart, I think you'll also know that it's true just qualitatively. And then third, of mouth is notoriously hard to measure. If you've heard the saying, you manage what you measure, since it's hard to measure word of mouth, it oftentimes gets ignored by product and marketing teams, which makes it a big opportunity for people who don't ignore it. And that's why we're going to be talking about it. All right. So how have people been measuring word of mouth nowadays, like historically? So there's three ways, and they're all flawed. So one is net promoter score, which I personally hate. The problems with there is that you can't quantify actual growth impact. And in addition, just because someone says they would recommend a product to a friend doesn't mean they actually do. Net promoter score, for people who aren't familiar, is a question it's a survey question that's asked is, how likely are you to tell a friend or a family member about this product on a scale from 1 to 10? The second method is attribution surveys. This is the how did you hear about a survey? So, it's oftentimes sent when people finish signing up for a product. It's actually pretty nice in that you could ask, like, how did you hear about us? Was it word of mouth? The challenges, though, are that it suffers from low response rates. And also, there's respondent bias. The users who do respond are different from the ones that don't. So, you have to extrapolate, and you're dealing with some bias there. The last one is social listening tools. These are tools that kind of crawl, social and pick up on when people are mentioning your brand name. Problem is this misses dark social and offline word of mouth. Dark social is stuff like, people chatting through text, WhatsApp, which is a lot. It's a big chunk of online word of mouth. And then it also completely misses offline word of mouth. And this ends up, I've seen this before, companies use these, measure them, and then they still always end up in the same place, which is, like, now what? What do we do with this data? So we're going to talk about two new word of mouth measurement methodologies. One is the word of mouth coefficient, which I wrote about on Reforge in 2020. There's 2 articles. It goes really in depth. So I'm going to introduce this, but I'm going to spend less time on this. This technique is good for improving word of mouth growth loops, and also is really good for accurately forecasting growth. Word of mouth is often a meaningful, or organic new users are a meaningful part of any growth model, but it's often done in such a hand-wavy way that the forecasts are not very accurate. This solves that. The second methodology is a new one that I've never talked about before, but the working name is word of mouth tipping points. And word of mouth tipping points, it's good for actually accelerating word of mouth growth loops and optimizing marketing spend. It's very, very actionable, and that's what I like about it. We'll start with that one first. I'm going to take a quick look at the poll to see how much. Eleanor, do you know how I pull up?
Yeah, I just shared the results. Can you see them?
Yeah. All right. It looks like 50% of people have some familiarity with the word of mouth coefficient, and 50% don't. So we'll start with tipping points, and then we'll go to word of mouth coefficient. Let me do a quick time check. All right. Let's get into word of mouth tipping points. So before I hop to the next slide, which is going to have some data, I want to set the context for the case study we'll be talking about here. This case study is around Class Dojo. And again, Class Dojo is an edtech product that teachers use. They use it to manage their classrooms. And it's basically like if you ever were in a class in elementary school where teacher gave out points for good behavior, it's the digital version of that. So every kid in the class has a cute, fuzzy monster avatar. And when kids are on task, they just get points, and then they can redeem those points later for like a party or something they like. And it actually really transforms classes because it reduces the behavior problems and allows teachers to focus on working. It's effectively solo player for teachers in that you don't collaborate. It's not a product you collaborate with other classes. And this product also has been widely successful. Like I mentioned earlier, it's expanded to 90% of school districts across the U.S. Now let's look at the word of mouth, the growth curves for ClassDojo. So, in edtech and edtech for this case study, we see that acquisition tipping points exist when 3 teachers adopt a product or a school. So let me help you digest this slide. This chart shows active teacher growth within an average school. So it's blended data. It's not just one school, but it represents what happens in an average school. So the x-axis, you have months from an initial teacher using the product in a school. And then the y-axis is number of teachers using the product or adopting the product. What you see here is that when you get one, you usually have one teacher using it and they use it through the school year. Sometimes they get another person on, then they get another person on, in another 6 months. Once you get to 3 users, acceleration like skyrockets. You've hit this, what I call a word of mouth tipping point. And now how can I attribute this to word of mouth? This is why I like this case study the most, is because this product spread through teachers talking. There was no paid acquisition, no sales. And again, it was not a multiplayer product. So there weren't other non-word of mouth network effects that, would have muddied this data. So this really opened my eyes to the power of word of mouth tipping points. And again, it was very clear, again, this is fake data, just to illustrate the point, but in this example, 3 teachers using the product, is where you would see that inflection point. The pattern was consistent and it also qualitatively made sense. If you think about it, if there's 3 teachers in a grade level, one teacher uses it, talks to the other teachers, then it can start spreading to the other grade levels as well. All right. Now, I think the power behind this framework is that you don't have to actually influence word of mouth to reap its benefits. You really just need to identify the social nodes and track their tipping points. So let's get more specific. Using the same example, once you quantify the tipping point, which again we said was a teacher density of 3 within a school, you can start optimizing acquisition by social node. And social node for here is school. And there's multiple schools. So what would you try and do if you were this company? You would say, okay, here's the dynamic we're seeing. If we get to 3, word of mouth takes over, or it really compounds. You hit that inflection point. You'd want to do things where one strategy is you want to just get more schools to their tipping points rather than spending and spreading all your, acquisition resources broadly and globally, without any focus. So, this would be like if you're doing anything organic, targeted, like paid tactics, you would want to say, okay, here are our schools that only have 1. We're going to go more hands-on, or we're going to go heavier with those schools and those locations. The other strategy that people do is they'll double down on post-tipping point schools. For me, strategy 1 makes sense, but, strategy 2 is another way you could do that, where you're going to be more hands-on, you're going to give more customer support you're going to give more resources to those schools that have already hit their tipping points. Now, I know we talked about EdTech. I love EdTech because it has elements of B2B, it has elements of B2C, and it has a lot of different communities or social nodes. Let's talk about some other industries and what social nodes might look like. So SaaS is a great example where local businesses, especially within the same vertical, those can comprise nodes. So Brightwheel example. Brightwheel is SaaS for preschools. What you see here is that local preschools monitor what their local competitors are doing. They don't really collaborate again, but they know what they're doing. And also prospective families will ask about specific tools. So here, you see that if you start acquiring within a specific local node, those other preschools will start hearing about it, and you'll have those same effects, those tipping point effects. Another one is creator economy. And the social node here would be like type of influencer. So for example, if you were to use Substack, growth thought leaders follow each other. If you move a few of the biggest over to Substack, the rest will follow. And that's the way you can say, okay, I'm going to focus on getting liquidity in this social node or this vertical, rather than just shooting across all verticals. Health tech is another one. Really interesting stuff here. But social nodes are around geographies, practices, specialties. An example here is therapy. Primary care doctors recommend their patients to therapists they trust. And so, you could look at doctors as individual social nodes that produce word of mouth within a community. Gaming and social. So a social group could be a node. A school could be a node. I see this in my own life with Minecraft. My kids are at the age where, they don't have their own iPhone. They don't have their own iPad, but there's definite word of mouth happening here, where if a few kids start playing in a social circle, even though the parents don't want other kids to play, their kids to play, other kids will feel left out, and there will be a big push from the kids to to have their parents buy and adopt the product. Now, I know we talked about Class Dojo, and that was a pretty clean example. You see it in the data. This won't always be the case for all products, but you can check for tipping points. You can check if it exists in your actual channel data. So, for example, you could look at your paid ads. When you target by social node, e.g. geo or business types as an example, and you segment performance, do you see click-through and conversion rate go up? That would be indicative that, look, okay, word of mouth effects are happening and they are improving your channel performance. The other part of growth is sales, the sales funnel, both inbound and outbound. You could look at your entire sales funnel from lead to close one. And when you look at it by social node, for example, preschools mapped to a local zip code, you could see that as you increase penetration within the zip code, all your metrics, your sales funnel metrics improve. And again, same thing by creators by content category for that Substack example. All right, now we have about 8 minutes left. We'll talk about the second one. We'll go through this one a little bit faster. But this method is, it's a framework and a metric called the word of mouth coefficient. This came from my Zynga days, where myself and Tomas Puello, we did this as a side project and just in our spare time, and actually found out there was something there. It became a metric that was used across all Zynga game studios when they were developing games and putting games through soft launch. Soft launch means basically you launch a game somewhere in like one territory, like Canada. Canada was the dumping ground for every app. And you would test the metrics. If the metrics were great, then it would get greenlit for global launch. All right. So the word of mouth coefficient has a simple premise behind it. And that is the people who are actively engaged with your product talk about your product, and they do it at a fairly consistent rate. This makes sense because word of mouth acts like a growth loop with retention at the core. The longer you engage your users, the more word of mouth they generate. So, we all love growth loops. If you're attending a Reforge event, you love growth loops. The growth loop is this: you acquire new organic or word of mouth users. They try your product based on that word of mouth. They now became part of your engaged existing users. You maximize the frequency of high value engagements before they churn. And while that's happening, every time you're engaging them, they're generating word of mouth. Now, those existing users will talk about the product offline and via social, which then drives new organics. The word of mouth coefficient quantifies this rate that active users generate new organic users. So here's the calculation. we can share, and maybe Eleanor, you can actually put in the comments the links to the word of mouth coefficient articles where people can go deeper. It's on Reforge. It's also on my personal Substack. I think the templates that you can download might be gated on the Reforge one. So if you can't get access to them, just check out my Substack. But the word of mouth coefficient is basically a ratio of new organic users that come in divided by everyone else, all the other active users, which are basically returning users and non-organic new users. So new organic users are on the top, the numerator, everyone else is on the bottom. Okay, so don't just take my word for this. We have seen, so as part of this research, we've seen that the active users and new organic users are highly correlated across companies and industries. This is an example of how you do the analysis, which I strongly recommend you do. You need to see that the relationship, the correlation actually holds for your product before using this. But you see what you're trying to look for is a high R squared when you do a correlation analysis between your new organic users and your existing active users. There are light, medium, and heavy versions of this analysis with templates, again, on Reforge and in my personal Substack. So let's get into a specific example at Zynga. When we used the word of mouth coefficient, it was great because it was a stable predictor of new organic users, even when there were big DAU fluctuations. So let me help you digest this slide. This gives like the life cycle of a mobile game. On the bottom, you have time since game release, and the y-axis is daily active users. And each of those bars is the daily active users on a specific day, broken out by retained, paid, everyone else in green, and then the new organics in blue. So you can see the bulk of DAU is retained users, but every day you're getting new organics. The squiggly line is the word of mouth coefficient. And what you see is that it's pretty stable at just about under 0.1. That means that for every DAU, you are driving 0.1 incremental new users. And again, the value in this is its predictive power. You know what you're going to get for organically for any paid acquisition investments. Zynga PMs built this into every game's growth model after it was introduced. It was part of the greenlight process. It also varied. We saw that it also varied by genre, which made it great for benchmarking. You can have different types of games. You could have trivia games, casino games, other niche genres, and games could actually get killed during soft launch based on their growth metrics, which included the word of mouth coefficient. All these soft launch metrics would plug into a growth model that had a certain, DAU trajectory and revenue trajectory. Word of mouth coefficient was one big part of it. Now let's look at another industry, going back to EdTech. So Quizlet, the word of mouth coefficient is interesting because there was major seasonality and it was also impacted by COVID. So let's look at this slide again, or look at the chart. Chart is time, or the x-axis is time. The y-axis is word of mouth coefficient over time. Now there's a lot here, but think about it. Look at the blocked periods, the colored periods. The orange or the pink are holiday periods, and the green are active school years. So you see the word of mouth coefficient really spike during the beginning of school, and this is when people are getting into their patterns, adopting new tools. Kids are adopting new tools for studying. Teachers are pushing new tools for studying, and there's a lot of word of mouth virality. Once you start getting into finals, people already have their habits. Even if they're talking about it, kids aren't going to adopt the new products. And then, during the holidays, it plummets. No one is talking about these products because no one's doing any work. Start of spring, you have another moment for people to adopt new education tools, and it kind of peters down until you get to the summer holiday. COVID-19 was really interesting here because there was a huge dramatic impact on the word of mouth coefficient in the US. And this is helpful. This is actually actionable. They could make decisions on what they're going to do, where they're going to invest more, and especially by geo or other segmentations. Now, let's see how we're doing on time. Okay, so we're perfectly on time. You're welcome, Eleanor. So before we get into QA, quickly, if you want to chat with me further, you can follow me on LinkedIn. Here's my link. You can email me. Also, we're thinking about doing an upcoming course dedicated to virality and specifically word of mouth growth loops. Click on this link and sign up on the waitlist if you are interested. It's an important demand signal for whether or not I should actually invest and build out this course. Again, there's a lot of content, and I think one of the challenges historically is that the content has not been very actionable. I think there's a lot of actionable stuff that I could share, and that's why we might do the course. So definitely fill this out. Other ways that you can work with me is I do advise, and I work with 2-3 startups at a time. So the best way, if you want to work together more closely on this, is have your founder reach out to me with your founder, and we can explore and engage longer term engagements there. The other thing is if you just need a quick session and you want to talk about go deep with around word of mouth roadmaps for your product, you can use this intro.co link to book time with me. And probably in 30 to 60 minutes, we can give you a lot of really good direction. All right. So we have 14 minutes left for QA. Eleanor, I'm going to pause to let you hop in and see if you have any direction or any other things that I missed.
Nope, all good. Just one thing for the Q&A. Please use the Q&A functionality. It may be hidden under the More button if you don't see it in the bottom bar, but please ask your question using the Q&A. And also, I would suggest that you upvote questions you're interested in. This helps getting a signal of what are the top questions we should prioritize. So we can give you a few, 1 minute to just upvote. There's a little thumb that you can click. Super easy. Seems like there's one question that gets two questions actually got 10, 11 upvotes. You want to get started with those, Yousuf?
Yeah, let me just read them, scan the other questions. All right. So the first question is, what's an example of a social node for an e-commerce shop? I can think of two that are worth looking at. One is geo, and then the other is let's see, what's the best way to describe it? It's I think a community, or there are certain product enthusiast communities around specific things. I know there's keyboards. People love keyboards, and there's sites dedicated to keyboards. Among other products, I think there's one specific platform where enthusiasts can get together and build demand for specific products. So you can look at that. I think it's called I forget what it's called, but that's an example for e-commerce. Geo is probably the easiest one and the most valuable one to look at. Now, second question. Inflection point has a specific meaning in calculus when the second derivative intercepts the x-axis, which is different from what the fake data graphs are showing. How do you actually operationalize tipping point in order to quantify it? So I'm interpreting this question as, Yousuf, you're using the wrong math terminology, which might be the case. But I can focus on how do you actually operationalize tipping point. I think it's simple from the example. To me, it's there's like a North Star metric. You need to get a density of 3 teachers using the product in the school. How do you operationalize that is like, okay, what are the levers you have available at your disposal to get that school to 3 teachers using it, rather than taking those same finite marketing resources like paid acquisition and just spreading them out more broadly across all schools, regardless of schools whether a school has hit its tipping point or not. How do you determine that the magic number is 3? I mean, in the case of the Class Dojo, we could see it in the graph. We could see it in the chart. Wherever you see what I'm referring to as an inflection point, and I know that might not be the exact calculus term that we need to use, but you see the inflection point. You see where the number where it starts to get traction by itself, and the rate of change inflects upward. That's how you determine the magic number. And you can segment by different types of schools. If you're not seeing it clearly, you can segment your data further and further. Types of schools, geos, etc. The number might be different. All right, I'm gonna look at the other questions. Okay, Rob Katz, how do you see the accuracy of these new solutions versus a combination of the NPS survey and search social listening to measure word of mouth? I read this question as, should you just use these, or should you use multiple? With attribution and measurement, I actually think there's value in using multiple, because what I tell people is any one attribution methodology or measurement methodology is inherently wrong. They're all wrong in some way or another. The more you use together, the better you can triangulate towards the truth. And not only that, but like let's take NPS as an example. NPS still, even though I hate it, still has value in prompting and facilitating word of mouth. Now, like, how is that the case? So you're fundamentally asking users a question: how likely are you to recommend this product? And those that self-report high numbers, 9 or 10, those ones are ready to be viral, and you need to help facilitate virality for those users. So it's a good trigger point for actually building interventions around it. So I'll give you an example. In edtech, the way that teachers oftentimes learn about new tools is they will go to staff meetings where someone will present. So users who say that they have high NPS, or teachers who have high NPS, when they say that, can prompt them, hey, go share at a staff meeting. Here are some resources to help you present at that staff meeting. Those are all ways you can use it in conjunction. Okay, I see another one, which is, how would you think about including word of mouth in multi-touch attribution analysis? I don't know if it's valuable there, but where I do think you can use it is if you're getting into the realm of marketing mix modeling. You can actually use it for those models as an input. All right, Bobby, if you spend on paid advertising past a certain point, you are likely starting to attribute install signups to paid channels that you would have gone organically, i.e. cannibalization of your organic install signups. What's your experience? in terms of dealing with this, and how would you account for this, if at all? Okay, so this is a good question. I think this is a broader attribution question rather than a word of mouth specific one. And in the second article of the word of mouth coefficient, there's a chart that I show that, like, basically how do you deal with attribution as your marketing mix gets more complicated, or your spend gets larger. And the short answer is, at that point, you're probably going to be moving to the realm of leaning on marketing mix, MMM, and uplift studies. All right, I think those are all the major ones. Let me see if I can find ones that I specifically like. All right, what percentage of companies have you seen having good data available to allow the correct word of mouth measurements? I think there's a bigger problem is that I see is most companies don't even try to do this. What I really like about growth as a discipline is a lot of it starts with building novel data sets, getting together data sets that don't exist otherwise. So that might include, like, like I talked about a social node database. Let's use the preschool one as an example. You can go and scrape every preschool in the US. And you can also scrape it and tag its zip code. Like that, again, now forms a database that most people may not have been looking at. And you can now also map that to your own acquisition and start saying, like, okay, by zip code, what's my penetration? What's my density within each zip code of acquired preschools? So short answer is, like, no one's looking at this. I'd say there's probably 50% of companies have something that could be viable for either the word of mouth tipping points or the word of mouth coefficient. So Mamfe, you said, how do you determine which social nodes to invest in? Is it possible to attribute coefficient to one social node? All right, so there's two questions there. How do you determine which social nodes to invest in? Like I mentioned, there's two strategies. You can say, hey, I'm going to take my limited resources and invest them in getting social nodes that are not at their tipping point to their tipping points. And oftentimes the way I think about that is you see how aggressively does the curve inflect up once you reach the tipping point. And the higher the inflection is, and the more that it's driven by word of mouth and not paid acquisition, the more you'd want to say, okay, I'm going to try and put all my budget towards schools that have not hit their tipping point, and not invest counterintuitively in schools that have already gotten to their tipping point, because those are already at their flywheel and growing organically through word of mouth. Now, again, the other one is you might say, I'm going to only focus on schools that have already hit their social tipping point. People have asked me about that one. I don't really see it, but it is a strategy. If you want to get even more nuanced, segment by social nodes. Does the curve and the tipping points, do they look different when you segment by type of social nodes? So, example, using EdTech again, affluent neighborhood schools versus non-affluent neighborhood schools, different geos. You could imagine that there'd be different dynamics in these different types of schools, and wherever you see the biggest inflection, and the lower the density number required, the more I would focus on those nodes, because it just means you have to invest less to get to tipping points, and tipping points that have higher returns. So I think that's it. We're at time. Again, if you want to chat more Here's how you can reach out to me. I'm happy to go, if you use the intro.co link, I'm happy to go deep into your specific product. I've done this with a few folks, and it really sets, people who are, operational, like PMs and marketers who are working on the problem in the right direction. And sign up for the course. Again, your feedback here is very, very valuable as a demand signal on whether we build out this content further. And then lastly, enjoy summer. Summer's coming up.